No one imagines what happens after the church doors close. For many, the day ends with whispered prayers, lit candles, and that silence that feels sacred. But what almost no one sees is the man who remains there, alone, looking at the empty pews, trying to find meaning in what he preaches every day, even when he no longer finds in himself the same fervor that once drove his decision. The days seem to repeat the same cycle, waking before sunrise, wearing the same habit, following the same rituals, and responding with a rehearsed smile to every devout greeting. But there are mornings when the mirror no longer reflects faith, only a tired face and eyes that carry the doubt of someone who hears confessions but can never make his own. The altar, always clean and adorned with flowers, hides the exhaustion of someone who spends hours listening to the pain of others with nowhere to pour out his own. The weight of the cassock isn't in the fabric, but in the expectations it carries, to be a guide, a saint, a counselor, and unshakable. As if humanity ceased to exist the moment the collar was buttoned, while everyone believes he lives in peace, with plenty of time to pray and meditate. Few know that his schedule is a mosaic of masses, funerals, visits to the sick, meetings, and crises that need healing words, even when he himself is silent inside. Maybe you also know someone like that, someone who serves with such intensity that they forget how they feel. There's always a chair reserved for him at important events, always a seat of honor at community celebrations. But when he arrives home, what awaits him is not a party nor warmth, just cold walls, a silent radio, and the echo of his own voice repeating homilies in thought. Because deep down, loneliness doesn't have to scream to hurt. Many say being a priest is living a fulfilled life, that it's being in direct contact with the divine. But what isn't seen is the daily effort to uphold that image when faith becomes routine and the heart no longer burns like it used to. Time passes, and with it, some prayers become memorized lines. Not for lack of love, but from trying too hard to remain what everyone expects. In confessions, he hears stories that would make anyone cry. And he does cry, on the inside, because he can't show weakness. He can't let his voice tremble. He can't afford to break down in the middle of a ceremony. Have you ever thought about what it's like to comfort everyone and never be comforted? A priest's life seems clean, orderly, serene. But beneath that surface are sleepless nights, recurring nightmares, and memories that won't fade. And the constant doubt, am I still making a difference? Does God still hear me with the same attention I expect from the faithful? Maybe you think this life is one of peace. But what if it's a life of continuous effort to not fall apart? Of waking up every day and putting on something that demands more from the soul than the body can endure? He lives surrounded by faith, but sometimes feels a void greater than the one he sees in the people he helps. A void that can't be filled with liturgy, but with truths he's no longer sure he can say aloud. There were days when his presence at Mass felt like just another act. And even so, he went on. The confessional is a sacred place for many. For him, it's a place where he hears sins that mirror his own thoughts, and that hurts. Not out of judgment, but out of recognition. He knows there's a thin line between guiding and getting lost. While many are captivated by the aura of spirituality that surrounds his figure, he knows that sometimes all he needs is to turn off the parish phone and just exist for a few hours. No prayer requests, no surprise visits. No need to be the unbreakable pillar everyone touches in search of healing. There is something deeply human in a priest who looks at the sky in silence and hears no answer. Not because of lack of faith, but because of too much waiting. And in that silence he keeps going. He fulfills, repeats, believes, even when he doubts. Have you ever felt like you're always giving and never receiving? Maybe you're not a priest, but maybe you live that too. That role of holding up everyone's world while your own slowly sinks. There are Sundays when he smiles at hundreds of people, extends his hands, blesses, offers the right words. But deep down, all he wants is to go back in time. Or disappear for a while. Or simply not have to be anyone's fortress that day. The smell of incense, the sound of Bible pages turning, the choirs singing. All of that still moves him, but less often. As if a part of him had been lost between one sermon and another. And what remained was just the function, not the feeling. He listens to everyone. But who listens to him? That question follows him even when he lies down alone, with the crucifix on the wall as the only witness to the tears he doesn't let fall. Because even crying has become something to be contained. After all, who would trust a priest who shows weakness? Have you ever felt that you can't fail, can't break, can't grow tired? Write in the comments if you also live something on the inside that no one sees on the outside. A priest's life is made of service, but it's also made of renunciations, of absences, of memories that pile up with no place to be released. There is no confessor for the one who is everyone's confessor. Even surrounded by sacred symbols, he sometimes feels invisible. Not to God, but to the people who see him as a function, not as a man. And in that emotional anonymity, he remains present. There are wounds that don't bleed. There are pains that don't need screams. There are burdens not carried on the back, but in the soul. And no one sees. And when he lays down his cassock at the end of the day, all that remains is a tired body and a silent spirit, waiting for the next call, the next funeral, the next confession. As if his life only exists between one person's need and another's. Maybe holiness isn't found on the altar, but in the ability to keep going, even when the heart no longer shines. Maybe the true sacrifice isn't celibacy, it's silence. Those who look from the outside see faith. Those who look from the inside see resistance. The day begins before sunrise, always. The clock shows a time few know awake, but there, the routine is already pulsing. He gets up without haste, as someone who no longer feels sleepy but also doesn't feel excited. He sets water to boil, straightens his collar with an automatic gesture, and observes the still dark world through the sacristy window. It's in this silence that he finds himself, and sometimes gets lost. The bell rings. There's no crowd, only 2 or 3 familiar faces. Entering quietly and sitting in the same places as always. He walks to the altar like someone repeating an old dance. Every step is measured, every gesture deliberate. The ritual is beautiful, but what no one sees is the effort behind the steady gaze. Fatigue never sits in the front pew, it settles. In the chest dot at the table where faith is celebrated, he extends his hands with reverence. And while uttering sacred words, his thoughts at times drift away. They return to childhood, to the first calling, to the reason that brought him here. But that memory now feels distant. Like a voice that once shouted in the past, but today only whispers out there is something cruel about constancy. In the repetition. In doing everything right, every day, without deviation, without explosion, without space for crisis. He knows many depend on that constancy. But who sustains the faith of the one who sustains faith? After Mass, someone is always waiting. A prayer request, a family complaint, a tear in need of a hug. And he offers it all. Listens attentively. Shakes hands, says what needs to be said. But as he turns away, he sometimes feels he's given more than he had. The room where he gives counsel is simple. Worn chairs, a crucifix on the wall, a Bible always open to the same page. People enter with open hearts and leave relieved. But when the door closes, he remains, sometimes staring into space, as if searching for an answer that never came. There have been days when he thought about leaving. Not out of lack of love, but exhaustion. Wanting to feel again what he felt at the beginning. Because no one teaches that faith also grows old. And sometimes gets sick. During hospital visits, he walks among beeping machines and soulless hallways. He speaks words of comfort he has memorized, but tries, with his eyes, to offer sincerity. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Some look at him with hope, others with anger. And he understands both. A mother cries over her child's body. He reaches out, says nothing. Because he knows that in that moment, no word reaches, only presence. And that, perhaps, is the heaviest part. Having to be present even when the will is to disappear. Someone once asked if he felt special. He smiled, without answering. Because how do you explain that? Sometimes you feel invisible within your own mission. As he walks down the street in his cassock, he receives waves, reverences, requests for blessings. But he also hears whispers, muffled laughs, silent judgments. Being a priest is to live between deep respect and constant doubt. He has learned to listen more than he speaks. But he's also learned to swallow words he wanted to scream, because it's not allowed to doubt, nor question, nor admit he's afraid to. The office is small but full of papers, letters, reports, messages, bills. Managing the parish demands much more than preaching. Sometimes he spends more time with numbers than with verses. There are moments when he sits alone in the empty church pew. And there, without ceremony, without an audience, he prays, but not like in the books. He simply takes a deep breath and lets his thoughts wander. Because sometimes praying is just that, existing before something greater. Once, someone accused him of being cold. Said he no longer felt anything. He just looked without reaction. How could he explain that there are days when feeling too much would make him collapse? Maybe you've felt that too. That need to be strong when everything inside you begs for a moment of weakness. The clothes are always clean. The altar, always tidy. But inside, there are messy drawers no one opens. Thoughts he hides even from himself. Memories he tries to forget, but that return in the night silence. He officiates weddings with a steady voice, speaks of love, of union, of surrender, but then returns home alone, where no one waits. The paradox of celebrating bonds while living. The absence of all. He has delivered last rites to children, the elderly, strangers, and friends. He has seen eyes close, heard final breaths, and learned that death doesn't ask who you are. At spiritual retreats, he smiles, behaves, gives guidance. But sometimes, behind the closed door of his room, all he wants is to sleep without thinking, without carrying the world on his shoulders, without having to pretend balance. Some believe he has a direct connection with God, but he knows even the oldest prophets faced silence. And the silence of God is the hardest to interpret. Sometimes he prepares sermons no one understands, because there are messages that only make sense to those who've lived on the edge of faith, who've seen the ground vanish beneath their feet, and kept walking. If someone has ever judged you without knowing who you are, write in the comments. Maybe this video isn't just about him. Have you ever thought what it's like to spend an entire life taking care of others and realize no one asks how you are? At community lunches, he serves food, cleans the mess, laughs with children. But inside, he counts the minutes until he can return to his room and simply be silent. Not out of disdain, but from exhaustion. He keeps letters he never sent. Small notes with reflections he doesn't dare preach. Texts where he confesses he's afraid, that he feels longing, that he sometimes wants to give it all up. But he never sends them. In one of the drawers, there's an old photo. Him and a group of seminarians smiling. Time passed. Some gave up, others left. He stayed. And still wonders why. Not because he doesn't love his vocation, but because sometimes love demands too much. And no one told him it would be like this. During the early hours, when the body begs for rest and the mind insists on thinking, he gets up, turns on a soft light, and walks to the same corner of the house where a sacred image rests. He doesn't say a loud prayer. He simply stands there, like someone waiting for silence to say something. like someone waiting for an answer that may never come, or maybe already came in forms he didn't recognize. The phone rings at any hour. Sometimes it's an emergency. Sometimes it's just a lonely person wanting to talk, and he answers, always answers. Even when his body trembles with exhaustion, even when his head throbs. Because inside him there is a greater urgency than his own well-being, to be useful, to never turn anyone away. There was a time when he used to cry in secret. Then he stopped crying. Not out of strength, but from emptiness. When the soul tires of pleading, it simply goes on, without emotion, without being moved. It just fulfills. As if life had become a long sequence of tasks. The walls of the church are always cold to the touch. He walks past them every day. As someone who lives in a setting he built and no longer knows if he belongs to. Everything is where it should be. But inside him, something is missing. And he knows, it's not faith, it's meaning. Sometimes, during baptisms, while the water runs down the baby's head and everyone smiles, he feels a pang in his chest. A kind of longing he can't confess. An absence without a name that lives inside him, what could have been, what he chose to leave behind. He learned to silence desires, to hush urges, to repress impulses. Because being a priest is not just renouncing the world, it's renouncing oneself. And that, no one teaches in the seminary. That you only learn by living it. An old lady calls him son. A man calls him father. A child calls him a saint, but he knows he is none of those. He's just a man trying not to fall. Trying not to lose himself. Trying to keep a light alive that sometimes flickers. In the confessional, some see him as a judge, others as a friend. But he sees himself as a mirror. Because many times, the words he hears are the same that echo within him. The same dilemmas. The same temptations. The same faults. Just spoken by other voices. During Mass he watches the faces. Each one with its pain, its guilt, its hope. And he feels the weight of carrying all those expectations. Being the channel between heaven and earth. Being the bridge, even when he's standing at the edge of the abyss. Have you ever thought what it's like to live an entire life for others, and never know if anyone would do the same for you? There was a day he almost couldn't finish the homily. His throat tightened, his eyes filled, his breath failed. But no one noticed. Because the cassock, while it covers him, also hides him. In the parish dining hall, he eats alone. The food is simple, always the same. The taste no longer matters. The silence of the place weighs more than any fast. That's when he most misses hearing his name spoken with affection. A sincere "How are you?" The walls of his room hold secrets. Letters he never replied to. Gifts he couldn't refuse. Anonymous notes left at the church gate. All piled up. In a drawer he avoids opening. His solitude isn't that of someone who is alone. It's that of someone surrounded by everyone, and still feels unseen. Maybe you felt that too. Maybe not as a priest, but as a human being. Have you ever written in the comments something you've never told anyone? He's visited prisons. Blessed murderers, consoled victims. And he's learned there is no absolute evil, nor perfect goodness. Only broken stories trying to rebuild themselves. At the funeral of a child, he remained silent longer than expected. The mother wept, the father screamed, and he just held the casket's handle as if he could stop the pain from going with it, but he couldn't. A teenager asked him for relationship advice, and he wanted to say everything he knows, everything he's seen, but he held back, said only what was necessary. Because he can't always say what he truly thinks. And that hurts too. The parish garden blooms in spring. He walks there sometimes pretending to admire the flowers. But his mind is elsewhere, in everything he failed to become. In everything he still hasn't understood. They've said he always has the right words. But no one imagines how many times he speaks without believing. How often he repeats speeches, that once set him on fire, but now only warm him slightly. During the ordination of new priests, he gets emotional, but also feels fear for them, because he knows what awaits them. He knows the weight that doesn't appear in the photos. In the dark hallway of the parish house, there's a door that creaks every time it opens. Inside, he keeps memories that aren't holy, fragments of a life left behind, but that still pulses silently. When the phone rings in the middle of the night, he's no longer startled, no longer expects good news. He's learned that nighttime calls rarely bring peace. There are nights when he dreams of a different life, not luxurious, not scandalous, just ordinary. A life where he could make mistakes, love, get tired, without being seen as a symbol. If someone sees you as something you never wanted to be, then you understand what he feels. He reads every verse with attention, but some no longer touch him like before. Not from lack of faith, but from too many scars. Some passages hurt, some he avoids. Have you ever felt like you're living a role everyone applauds, but that you no longer recognize as your own? The last time he traveled, it wasn't to rest. It was to respond to a call. The time away from the church wasn't for relaxation. It was filled with weight, guilt, and plans to return. Because he knows, he never stops being what he represents. During a retreat, a fellow priest confessed he was exhausted. He simply nodded, didn't have the courage to say me too. Because a priest doesn't complain. A priest endures. When the day ends, he folds his cassock carefully, turns off the lights, and sits on the bed. He picks up the same rosary, the same words, and begins. But sometimes he stops halfway, and just stays there, waiting for the silence to say what he no longer knows how to. Time passes differently when you live for others. His days are not measured by hours, but by needs. Who needs comfort? Who is in mourning? Who demands a steady presence, even when the soul is fractured? The clock doesn't command. The calling does. Faith is not armor. It's a thin fabric that, over the years, wears down in specific places. Every funeral, every confession, every heavy silence, every injustice heard with tearful eyes, all of these are tiny stitches he must make alone, with invisible thread and trembling hands. One rainy night, he answered a last-minute request. Someone wanted to confess something before passing. He went. Even exhausted, even with a fever. Because he knows that someone's final forgiveness can't wait. But no one ever asked who forgives his exhaustion. Sometimes he watches the candles on the altar slowly melting. And he thinks, this is how life is lived here. Burning slowly, in silence, lighting others until you go out. And that thought never leaves him. The catechism children hug him with joy. They think he's wise, kind, almost magical. And he responds with genuine affection. But deep down, he's afraid of disappointing them one day. Because even those who guide others need direction. He's learned to avoid mirrors at certain times. There are days he doesn't want to see himself. Doesn't want to see in the reflection someone who's become more of a role than a person. Because being seen as a symbol can be beautiful, until the day you forget who's behind the image. The church's echo sounds different when it's empty. He likes hearing the reverberation of his own breath between the pews. There, he remembers he's still alive, not as a priest, but as a man trying not to disappear inside his own role. Have you ever felt that your value depends on the expectations others created about you? One Sunday, an elderly woman hugged him and said, "You saved me." He smiled, but that week, he couldn't even save himself. He slept poorly, ate little, and questioned whether it still made sense to go on. He avoids showing fatigue. He knows that, to many, he's the safe harbor. But there are days when his own inner sea is in storm. And in those moments he simply pretends everything is fine. Because he's learned that sometimes, other people's faith depends on his appearance of strength. At the bottom of the drawer, among forgotten papers and objects, there's a letter he wrote years ago. A farewell letter, never sent, never torn. Up, it's still there, as proof that one day he almost gave up. Almost, he doesn't talk about it. Not with his peers. Not with God, because he's learned to carry in silence what might cause scandal. But the weight doesn't disappear. It just shifts places. During a confession, a young woman said, "I feel like God has abandoned me." He held back the urge to say, "Me too sometimes." He just held her hand and prayed in silence. There's a kind of longing that has no name. He feels it when he sees families gathered, when he hears laughter from the street, when he realizes that even surrounded by people, he is almost always emotionally alone. If someone has ever seen you smiling and never imagined what you're holding inside, this video is for you. He's been judged for not seeming holy enough, for not smiling all the time, for not showing excitement during celebrations. But no one knows that inside, he's trying not to fall apart, trying not to lose the purpose he once chose. At Christmas, he celebrates the joy of birth. But after the Mass, he sits at a table with just one plate, one utensil, one cup. The silence of the holy night is deep, and sometimes cruel. With every new crisis in the community, he's called. With every tragedy, he's summoned. With every loss, he's sought. But when he needs someone, who can he call? He walks through the streets, greets everyone, hears "God bless you" repeatedly. But there are nights when he just wants to be invisible, not seen as something sacred, just someone ordinary. Have you ever thought about how many times a leader suffers in silence to keep everyone's faith alive? He's learned to love without possession, to care without reward, to give without expecting return. But that doesn't make him immune to pain, or to emptiness, or to the loneliness that visits often. Once, he thought about disappearing for a few days, just vanishing, without telling anyone, just to see if someone would miss him. But he didn't have the courage. Not out of fear, but out of responsibility. He's heard confessions of secrets he'll never tell anyone. And among those hidden words, he's recognized himself a few times. And that marked him more than any book he's ever read. During a celebration, while everyone sang, he had to hold back tears. A memory came rushing in. A memory that made him doubt for a moment. But he took a deep breath and kept going. Because that's what he always does. Keeps going. The days passed like pages of a book already read. Repetition, ritual, duty. And between each chapter, there are pieces of him left behind. Parts no one sees, that no one notices, but that are missed in the silence of night. He dreams of days of true calm. Not ceremonial calm, but inner calm. The kind that doesn't depend on repeated prayers or applause after Mass. A calm that comes from within. Some nights, he gets up and walks through the empty church, lights a candle, says nothing, just watches the flame, and imagines that in that small light, something still lives that makes it all worth continuing. Do you also carry something in silence every day? He knows not everyone will understand his pain. They don't have to. But if at least one person feels less alone after hearing this story, it will have been worth it. Because in the end, maybe that's the true ministry, continuing to be light even when everything inside wants to go dark. Sometimes he ends the day not knowing if he was truly heard. He speaks with dozens of people, advises, consoles, guides. But when he returns to his room, the silence seems to mock everything. He doesn't expect rewards, only that some word of his stayed with someone for more than 5 minutes. The candle he lights every night, before the small crucifix, is already smaller than it used to be. And that makes him think, not about the end of the candle, but about what it still illuminates. Because even small, the light fulfills its mission. Maybe just like him, if you feel that, somehow, this story lit something inside you, that alone is a reason to leave a like, not for vanity, but to show that stories like this still matter. One cold morning, he paused in the middle of the homily, just for a second. He remembered something he had buried years ago. And even though he resumed the sermon, that second echoed inside him for hours. Sometimes a silence interrupts more than 1,000 words. During a youth meeting, a young man sincerely asked him, "Do you still believe in all this?" He smiled with a certain weight in his eyes and replied, "I believe in continuing, even when I don't understand." And maybe that's the most honest kind of faith. If you've ever felt like that, living for something you can't explain, but also can't abandon, maybe it's time to subscribe to this channel. Because here, you'll never be the only one who feels this way. He collects loose phrases in his mind, things he heard from broken people, words that no one else would remember, but that stuck like invisible tattoos. And on long nights, it's those phrases that return, reminding him why he's still there. One day, someone he helped for years simply stopped coming, disappeared, no news. No thank you, nothing. And he learned, once again, that to serve is to give without expecting return. Even when it hurts. The bells ring every morning. But some days, they sound like reminders of a crushing routine. He looks at the altar, adjusts. His soul takes a deep breath, and enters. Because in there, his fatigue doesn't fit. Only his devotion. Do you also carry a routine where people only see you functioning, but never feeling? Comment below. Maybe you'll find other tired souls like yours in the comments. Once, a lady said, "You're the only person who truly listens to me." He wanted to say, "No one listens to me," but he kept it. As always, there are boxes he's never opened, unsent letters, memories kept in aging envelopes. In them, there's another man. One who dreamed of being a missionary, who believed the world could change because of a sermon. That man still exists, but he's buried. He's wanted to run away before, not far, just to a place where he could be just a man, where he could wake up without the weight of representing something greater than himself. But that desire always ends when someone calls him back. If this content is making you think differently about what it means to serve, activate the bell. That way, you won't miss the next episodes. There's still so much life we have to reveal here. At community parties, he's the last to eat, the last to sit, the last to leave. And no one notices, because everyone is busy smiling for the pictures. He smiles too, but his smile is tired, yet still sincere. Time has taught him that some hugs last longer than sacraments, and that certain tears say more than any well-written sermon. Faith, deep down, hides in those details. On one of those lonely nights, he heard a dog barking non-stop. And for some reason, it moved him. Because it seemed like someone, somewhere was also trying to be noticed. Even if just by a bark. Sometimes, all he wants is someone to ask if he's okay. No formality, no reverence. Just is everything all right in there? But almost no one asks that of someone who wears a cassock. Do you know someone who lives like this? Share this video with that person. Maybe they'll see something of themselves here, even if they never speak of it. He knows he'll never be a hero to anyone. But if he can be remembered as someone who was present, even while wounded, that's enough. Because presence is the hardest language to maintain when the whole world expects you to be more than you are. He's thought of giving up. But every time that happens, something small holds him back. A child's note. A whispered, "Thank you." A candle lit by someone. And he keeps going. Not out of grandeur, out of faithfulness. On certain nights, he gets up and walks through the church corridor with his eyes full. Not with theatrical emotion, but with exhaustion. With longing for what he never had. With desire to feel what he always preached. If you're still here, reading up to this point, maybe you too are thirsty for truth. If that's the case, you're in the right place. This community is yours too. He ends the day in silence. Memorized prayers. He just sits on the edge of the bed and breathes. Because sometimes, The only possible praise is not having given up today. The cassock hanging on the chair feels like a skin he removes to rest. But even then, he's never truly naked from expectations. They remain there, hovering like shadows that never leave him. One day he wrote, "Holiness is not about never falling. It's about continuing even with scraped knees." He never published it. But that phrase has saved him more than once. If you've made it this far, leave a like. Not because this video deserves it, but because maybe someone who needs this message will only find it if it appears among the recommended ones. He still opens the church every day, still lights the candle, still answers the calls. But now, after so many years, he understands. His mission was never to save the world. It was to make sure no one felt alone in it. And if this video made you feel less alone, subscribe, because every new episode here will remind you that every life has a backstage the world doesn't see, but that deserves to be told.